This is another Palafox Computers tutorial. This time we're working on the iPhone 6s, indicated by the back of the screen, or the back of the phone. It says iPhone S, and the model number. It's usually around A1688. Here's our replacement screen. Already has a pre-installed home button assembly ribbon that's already pre-attached. We're just going to swap out the screen, camera settings, and home button. We first start at the bottom. Make sure you have a pentalobe screwdriver. In this case, it's a 0x X300M. I'm sure you can see that. And also a screwdriver, a plastic removal tool, and an iSesame tool to open it. All right, let's get started. First, we're going to take our pentalobe tube. There's 2 screws on the bottom that needs to be unscrewed. Now, this phone has previously been opened, so it does not have the adhesive that was once on there. But once you open up an iPhone 6s, you'll have around the outside of the bezel, you'll have the double-sided tape that they use to adhere together. There might be a little glue left. So right next to the headphone jack, is where there's a little tab that you would slide in your Sesame tool. Gently pry it up. The phone is already off. Make sure your phone is off as well when you're doing this. First thing I always do when I open up any device that's been previously turned on is to disconnect the battery. So we're going to disconnect the battery and set the screws aside. I like to place it on the magnet right below the battery so that it doesn't go anywhere, and it's near where it goes. So I'm just going to set this aside. We'll go ahead and test that out there. You always want to use a plastic tool when removing any fixtures or attachments on the logic board, so as not to short it out by any metal contacts. And then we're going to remove the back plate for the LCD assembly hinge, camera hinge. And it always helps to have a magnetic screwdriver. Makes it easier to pull them out. Set them to the side. And let's put Next, we're going to remove the back plate, set that aside with the screws that we already have, and then we're going to gently detach our cables. Just take a little tiny bit of prying and it pops loose. So now we can set this main part aside for now. We're not going to use it. Now we're going to begin to disassemble the screen itself, starting with the camera or home button. I usually start with the home button assembling. Go ahead and transfer that over. Remove any adhesive on the back of the new LCD to prepare it for our installation, and remove the bottom screws on the home button, and then we're going to reattach it. I just like to set it aside for now because that'll be one of the first things that I reattach. And there's 3 screws, 2 on the bottom, 1 on top, and you gently slide this out underneath because this has a bridge here. And then we're going to use our plastic tool again to disconnect it from the board. Make sure you do not tear this ribbon where your home button is located, because then it'll cause you more trouble and you'll have to replace the home button. And a lot of times when you do that, the touch sensor no longer works, and we try to keep that intact. Gently reassemble into your new housing. it should automatically detach or reattach itself with the sticky. Now before we screw it in, or we can go ahead and attach it and screw it in. And then we'll put a back plate casing with the 2 holes on the right side facing up. It has a little groove that goes into. You'll see it whenever you put it back in. And for now, we're just going to put the 2 bottom screws in because we still have to transfer this plate from the old one to the new. So for now, we're going to leave it off. Next, what I like to do is to disconnect the side screws and just gently set it down here on a nice white piece of paper so you can see it. And basically the same technique goes for the iPhone 6 and 6 Plus, except for they have different cables and a different setup. But it's basically the same thing. If you can do this, you can do an iPhone 6. 3 screws on each side. Let me set those aside. Now we're ready to remove our proximity sensor, our front-facing camera. This is all built in together. We're going to set that in a box. The iPhone 6s particular model has a ring around the setting here, which we'll get to. Goes around that outer edge, and we set that aside. As you notice, it has a little lip that goes around it, so we're going to get ready to set that in there. What we do now is to remove the top layer of the camera assembly, remove the speaker housing, the earpiece speaker, and set it aside. We also want to transfer our camera lens from this old to the new so that our camera sits in properly, doesn't slide around. And then next we're going to take our plastic tool once again and gently pry up just the top part of our camera assembly proximity sensor. Then we're going to use a small isosemy to get between the speaker, just gently underneath it to remove that as well. Let me set that aside. Now what I also like to do is take this camera lens for the prox sensor, and we're going to reattach it onto the camera lens on the new, the proximity sensor. And once you get it down pat, I'm used to doing it within 15-20 minutes or so. The video is making it a little longer, but once you get it down pat, then you can repair these screens in about 20 minutes or so. So this has a sticky that we're going to remove. Now it varies depending on what type of screen that you purchase. But for the most part, they all have this little plastic sticky, which allows us to reattach our assembly as it once was. Now there's a little small black hole that the top of the proximity sensor goes into. You have to make sure that that goes into the groove as well. Now I like to always take this little white cap and put it back into the prox sensor's light sensor so that it doesn't allow too much light in. That way our proximity sensor works properly as it should. Now we'll give it a gentle tag so that everything seats in properly. I'm going to reattach our earpiece speaker. It has a little speaker on the bottom that reattaches into this groove right next to the camera lens. And then everything else should sit in properly. I like to give it a nice little wiggle to make sure it's in there, like that. Reattach the cable over top and just simply place your camera lens. I'm sorry, I'm missing a step. All right, before we do that, we need to remove this one screw on the side and remove our back plate and transfer it over. Getting ahead of myself. So once it's detached, it's simply change it over, and you want to make sure all your cables are pointing up and that this is laying flat so that we can reattach properly. And then we transfer our screws back over. Little screw on the side here, and then our screws all the way around on the sides. And then we have this screw for the bottom as well that we was waiting on the back plate to get installed. We can attach that. Being a little stubborn. Okay, now we're finished replacing our screws on the side. Three on each side once again. And we can set that aside for now. Once that is reassembled, now we can go back to our proximity sensor slash earpiece speaker and replace this back on. It just popped out while I was doing the other. Make sure everything's flat and flush. And we're just going to gently lay this across the gear. You have two holes here that you'll see once you put it back on that has to go into the grooves. Then we're going to reattach our back plate for this. Now, once you attach this, you'll notice this little black liner goes around this little speaker here, or this little assembly. And then we put our screws back in. Again, it helps to have magnetic screws. I'm just going to make sure that this is laying across correctly. It looked like it was out of it for a second. There we go. Once those are reattached, we're going to reattach it to our board. So we grab our phone again. And I always like to keep it disconnected, to keep the battery disconnected while we reattach, as to not short out any components. And it gently snaps back into place. See, my cable is backwards. This one has to go on the bottom. There we go. Like that. Once we have that reattached, we want to verify that we have it reassembled and that it turns on, which it does. So now we can go ahead and reattach the back plate. I like to stand it up no farther than here, so as to not stretch the cables and either pull it out of socket or damage it. So while it's booting up, we're going to go ahead and put this plate on to secure it in place while we finish testing. If I can get my screw jack right. You always remember the longest screw goes in this far right corner. You don't want to put that screw in the wrong spot because then you can damage your board. And then you have more problems to worry about. The rest of the screws will go into their respective places. And we're nearly done. Next, we're going to reattach the battery screw and bracket. And then we're going to test the cameras as well as the touch feature. We're going to make sure it doesn't have a drop zone, meaning that it doesn't drop off while we move our finger around the screen. So once you get done, you just simply reattach the screen, starting with the top. It goes underneath, and gently put a little pressure on the sides to get it to lay flat. Now we're going to test our screen. Type in your passcode if you have one. I'm going to type in mine. Load up, and we're going to do a test call. Easily just go to 611. Make sure the prox sensor works. We're going to put our finger over the prox. Turns black. Means it's verifying it works. Verify speaker. Speaker is working. And we're also going to verify their earpiece, which is working just fine. Next, what we're going to do is test for any sensitive errors that may drop off during typing or text, just to verify the digitizer is working properly. Just drag it around, and it seems to be working just fine. And our next step, make sure the home button works. We'll double tap in, and it works. So we can close our sensor out that they had on because their home button wasn't working. Assistive touch, and turn it off. We no longer need assistive. We're going to verify that the camera works. Camera works, and front facing. That works. So that's it. iPhone 6s. This particular model is an A1688, and there we are, all done.